The announcement came just after the morning startup checklist. "We're streamlining operations," said Ava Reynolds, her voice steady, her eyes never once meeting mine. "Some roles are becoming redundant. My name is Marcus Louu, age 52. For over 19 years, I'd been in charge of automation systems at Porton Aerotech, just outside Savannah, Georgia. 19 years of tuning, writing, fixing, keeping aging equipment running beyond expectations. 19 years of quiet stability, buried in the hum of conveyor belts and hydraulic presses. Ava continued, her voice floating across the factory floor like a final order. "We've partnered with Thermogrid Systems for our automation needs moving forward. The transition is effective immediately." Silence followed. Then 30-some heads turned toward me. Not with pity, but with that same detached curiosity you'd offer a museum relic being removed for cleaning. I nodded once, slow and measured, then turned back toward my workstation. I unplugged my laptop, packed away a coffee mug my son made me in 5th grade, a cracked pair of reading glasses, and a notebook of handwritten system code I'd never let anyone else touch. The factory had changed ownership twice since I started. This was the first time I was the one left behind. No raised voices, no fight. I'd watched others go, some angry, some broken. I wouldn't give Ava the satisfaction. She approached as I taped my box shut. "Your severance package is generous," she offered, placing a folder on the desk, crisp and cold. 3 months' pay, plus all accrued vacation. "Generous," I repeated, eyes unmoving. It wasn't about the money. It was the way I had become dispensable. If you've ever been replaced by a stranger holding a PowerPoint and a promise, you'll understand. And if stories like this hit close to home, do me a favor. Hit like, share this with someone who's been there, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and quiet revenge. As I carried the box past the humming machines, I found myself walking through ghosts. Memories layered over steel and motion. Every workstation had a fingerprint of mine on it. The pneumatic arms in assembly line 3. I'd retuned them after a supplier update crippled their sync. The conveyor in packaging? I'd patched its firmware during a storm blackout in 2014, kept it moving while the rest of Savannah shut down. Ava was right about one thing. What I'd built was old. But it had been built to endure, built with purpose. More importantly, it had been built by someone who knew exactly when a sensor was about to fail just from the sound it made. I didn't need graphs or AI models. I had instinct and history. I started here when Porton was just 3 leased hangars making carbon components for 2 aerospace clients. Back then, the founder, Elias Porton, was still walking the floor in steel toe boots. I was 33, fresh from Georgia Tech, and foolish enough to tell him during my interview that I could get his prototype robotic welder running twice as fast without sacrificing weld integrity. I did. He hired me the next morning. For a decade, Elias gave me full reign. Let me rewrite firmware, build custom diagnostic scripts, even hand-solder signal boards when shipping delays backed us into a corner. He once pointed to a row of idle machines and said, "Marcus, most folks speak in meetings. You speak in code. I need more of that." After Elias retired, his daughter sold the company to a logistics firm in Chicago. They saw machines, contracts, output. I saw the decay beginning. But I stayed. Because I believed the heart of this place was still beating. Quietly, stubbornly, just like me. 3 months before the layoff, I noticed unfamiliar faces on the floor. Consultants, or so they claimed. They wore sleek polos with the Thermogrid logo, carried tablets, and asked the kind of questions that told me they were already making assumptions. They took pictures of control panels I had hand-calibrated and lingered near the diagnostic stations longer than necessary. I waited until their second visit before I asked Ava directly, "Are we bringing in outside support?" I kept my tone neutral, but she barely looked up from her screen. "Just exploring optimization opportunities," she replied, tapping through some dashboard. "Nothing to worry about." The following week, my admin credentials failed. At first, I chalked it up to an IT bug. These things happened. But when I called support, they claimed my permissions had been adjusted by leadership. I still had access to the machine-side systems, but the management interface, my interface, was now locked behind Ava's approval. I didn't say a word, not to her, not even to Leon, our floor supervisor, and the closest thing I had to a friend. Instead, I went home that night and backed up everything. Calibration logs, diagnostic routines, custom firmware scripts, not company property, mine, code written on weekends, notes scribbled in margins of manuals no one else read, 17 years of undocumented fixes and instinctual workarounds, captured quietly. I wasn't sabotaging anyone. But I also wasn't going to leave my life's work behind for people who thought legacy systems meant obsolete. I knew the truth. The systems would run until they didn't. And when that day came, the fix wouldn't be on a spreadsheet. It would be in my hands, or not at all. The HR meeting lasted 17 minutes. Thomas, the manager, had been at Porton nearly as long as I had. We'd shared coffee in the break room, the occasional talk about Braves games or weekend fishing. But that morning, he couldn't hold my gaze. Just slid a folder across the table and recited the terms. 3-month severance. Full payout on vacation hours. Medical extends through the quarter. I nodded, silent. There wasn't much else to say. As I turned to go, I paused at the door. "Is there anything else you need before I leave?" Thomas hesitated, cleared his throat. "Actually, Ava mentioned you might be open to a short-term consulting role. 2 weeks. Paid at your current rate, just to help with the transition." I nearly laughed. 2 weeks to download 19 years of tribal knowledge? 2 weeks to explain systems no one else had ever touched? To document logic I'd built in the gaps between manuals and machine quirks? "No thanks," I said calmly. "But I appreciate the offer." I walked out with my box. No security escort, just silence. Leon saw me heading toward the exit and peeled away from a conversation near line B. "This is Marcus," he told the group, quiet but firm. "He's the only one who knows how all of this holds together." "They disagree," I replied, keeping my stride steady. "Apparently Thermogrid knows better." Leon glanced over his shoulder. "What happens when the conveyors misfire again, or the alignment sensors start drifting like they did last winter?" I stopped at the door. Not my problem anymore. He frowned. "You're really just walking away?" I looked him in the eye. "What would you have me do? Beg for my job? Pretend Ava didn't plan this months ago? You think that'd change anything?" He didn't answer. I patted his shoulder. "Let's go fishing next weekend." But we both knew I wouldn't call. I drove home in silence. No radio, no calls. Just the tires whispering against the old Georgia asphalt. The house felt colder than usual when I walked in, though the thermostat read 72. I set the cardboard box on the hallway table, next to a photo of my son taken the day we built his first model rocket. That was years ago. Before college, before the divorce, before everything started shifting under my feet, I went into my office, sat down at the desk where I'd spent so many late nights tweaking code, troubleshooting from home, logging in remotely to avert another factory shutdown. The laptop opened with a soft chime. A notification blinked at the top corner of the screen. VPN disconnected. Porton Aerotech. That's when it landed. Fully, heavily, 19 years. Cut loose in a click. All the emergencies I'd fixed before anyone knew there was a problem. All the weekends I'd given up while others grilled burgers or watched football. The production lines that ran smoother because I knew, just by the sound, when something was off. Gone. No ceremony. No thank you. I opened my backup drive. Scrolled past file names that meant nothing to anyone else. Q-scan routine, Old Bay fallback. Heat sink tolerance, mark mod. Shorthand for fixes born from instinct, not instruction. I hadn't taken them to hurt the company, but I wasn't handing them over either. They'd made a decision. Ava had made a gamble. Let's see how far she'd get without the quiet things I'd built to keep that place running. I closed the lid, stood up and grabbed a beer from the fridge. For the first time in 19 years, I wasn't on call. Should have felt free. Instead, I felt like something essential had just been deleted. 6 weeks passed. I sent out a few resumes, took polite calls from recruiters who didn't understand the difference between mechanical automation and full system integration. Spent long afternoons on the lake, lying in the water, phone face down. The severance arrived like clockwork. So did the silence from Porton. Then, one Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed. Marcus, it's Ava Reynolds from Porton Aerotech. I let the pause stretch just long enough. Hello, Ava, I said flatly. Hope you're doing well. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. We're having some trouble with the North Line conveyor. Random stoppages, error codes we can't trace. Production is down nearly 20%. I closed my eyes. That line had needed a firmware patch before winter. I'd flagged it during my last cycle checks. The same issue I'd warned them about. What does Thermogrid say? I asked. A beat. They're still ramping up, getting familiar with our older systems. Of course they were. The older systems weren't just old. They were custom, built from scratch, held together by experience, not documentation. Ava cleared her throat. Look, I know this might be awkward, but people could lose hours if we don't fix this soon. She was appealing to my loyalty, the same floor workers who'd looked away as I packed my things. I'm available for consulting, I said calmly. $300 an hour, 4-hour minimum, paid up front. Scope in writing, there was silence. That's more than double your salary. No, I corrected. That's my consulting rate. Another pause. Then, I'll get back to you. She did. Within the hour, they accepted every term. The next morning, I returned to Porton Aerotech. Not as an employee, but as a paid visitor. A laminated guest badge hung around my neck. Ava didn't greet me at the entrance. A security guard walked me to the production floor like I was some outside contractor. I supposed, technically, I was. The North Line conveyor sat idle. A group of Thermogrid techs huddled around it, their laptops open, their expressions tight. Operators stood nearby, arms crossed, waiting for direction. Leon spotted me first. Relief crossed his face as he made his way over. Thank God you're here. I nodded, then went to work. The issue took me exactly 27 minutes to diagnose. Just as I'd expected, an outdated firmware module that never got the seasonal patch. The fix wasn't in any manual. It was in the calibration files I'd written 3 winters ago. I'll need access to the core logic controller, I said to Ava, who'd appeared suddenly at my elbow. and I'll need to run from my laptop. She hesitated, then gave a quick nod. Whatever you need. I connected, typed, navigated. To the untrained eye, I was searching through folders. In truth, I knew exactly where the file lived. I paused just long enough to hear one of the thermogrid techs whisper, "None of this is documented. It's a mess." I allowed myself the faintest smile. 45 minutes later, the line rumbled back to life. Operators returned to their stations, the noise of production rising like a wave. Ava exhaled. "Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what we would have done." I closed my laptop. "Is there anything else?" She hesitated. "Actually, we're seeing issues with the hydraulic lifts in Assembly Bay 3. Erratic behavior. Could you take a quick look?" I glanced at my watch. That would fall outside our current scope. I'd need a separate agreement. Her jaw tightened. "You're already here." "And this," I said evenly, "is business. Just like you made it." I packed up my laptop and walked out without looking back. Leon followed me toward the side entrance, falling into step like old times. "It's not just the lifts," he said quietly. "Sensors are misfiring all over. Quality control is flagging defects daily. Returns are climbing. It's starting to come apart." I didn't respond. He stopped just short of the door. "They're in over their heads, aren't they?" I met his eyes. "I don't need to guess, Leon. I built those systems. I know what happens when they're ignored." The calls started coming weekly after that, then twice a week. Each time it was a different issue. Unpredictable shutdowns, calibration drift, anomalies in the material tracking routines. And each time, I negotiated a new contract, always short-term, always tightly scoped. Each time my rate increased slightly. I didn't volunteer insights. I didn't warn them what was next. I fixed what they paid me to fix, and only that. They had traded long-term understanding for short-term promises. Ava had gambled that what I built could be reverse-engineered by outsiders. She was learning, slowly and expensively, that systems built through experience couldn't be replicated by diagrams or dashboards. One morning, after I restored line sync in composite assembly, Ava lingered while I packed up. "Do you ever regret not taking that transition role?" she asked. I looked up, expression unreadable. "Number, but I imagine you're starting to." She didn't respond, just gave a tight nod and walked off. And so it went. A cycle of failure and repair. The company slowly discovering that knowledge can't be outsourced. That legacy doesn't mean obsolete, it means earned. Line by line, bolt by bolt, day after day, year after year. And now, every fix had a price. 2 months after my final paycheck cleared, the phone rang again. Only this time it wasn't Ava. "Mr. Louu, this is Richard Kane, VP of Operations at Meridian Logistics Group." I sat up straighter in my chair. "I'll get to the point," he said. "Our Porton Aerotech facility is experiencing persistent quality issues. Warranty claims are up. We've lost 2 aerospace contracts. Ava tells me you've been assisting with specific technical problems." "That's correct," I said evenly. "We need something more comprehensive, a full engagement, 6 months full-time, to stabilize the systems and document your knowledge." I let the silence sit. He didn't fill it. Finally, I asked, "And what about Thermogrid?" A pause. "We're reevaluating that relationship." Translation: they were being pushed out. I leaned back. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Kane, but I'm currently speaking with several other companies. My time is limited." "Name your rate." I didn't hesitate. I quoted a number, triple my old salary. He didn't flinch. "We'll draft contracts today." 2 days later, I walked back into Porton, Not with a badge, but with leverage. Ava was gone. Leon met me at the entrance. They reassigned her to a facility in Reno, quietly. I nodded. No celebration, just inevitability. When I reconnected my laptop to the control servers, the damage revealed itself. Thermogrid's modifications had corrupted key firmware. Their predictive models drifted tolerances so far off that nearly 30% of output failed final checks. But what hit hardest was what I found in a folder labeled Strategic Initiatives. A proposal from Ava, sent to the board before my termination. Her plan had outlined projected savings from eliminating my position. It even acknowledged a temporary 3% increase in defect rates as acceptable loss. She hadn't replaced me out of progress. She'd sold the illusion of savings and bet against the systems I'd built by hand. Leon stepped into my temporary office just as I closed the last report. "She was gunning for you from the start," he said, nodding toward the folder on my screen. "That defect rate estimate wasn't a mistake. It was part of the plan." "Not just me," I replied. "She gambled with the entire foundation of this plant: precision, consistency, trust. She saw systems. I saw stakes." Leon leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "So what now? Fix it all and walk away again?" I looked at him. "Number, I'm going to fix what I built. Make sure it never falls into the wrong hands again." He raised an eyebrow. "How?" I smiled, just faintly. "By becoming irreplaceable, but in a new way." That night, I sat at my home workstation and opened a blank project file. Not a patch, not a hotfix, a rebuild. I started designing a new system, modular, transparent, and built for the next 20 years, not the last 20. Full-spectrum management and diagnostics platform that would bridge legacy equipment and modern analytics. I called it MARCS, short for Modular Automation Resource and Quality Suite. Every line of code, every function, was built not just to solve problems, but to explain them, to make the invisible visible. Diagnostics, fail-safes, performance tracking, and a direct line between what happened on the floor and what showed up in the boardroom. And just like the old systems, I wrote it to last. But this time, I owned it. This time, they wouldn't just need me for the fixes. They'd need me to understand what they were even looking at. 4 weeks into my contract, the chaos had begun to settle. Defect rates were trending downward. Warranty claims dropped. The floor felt steadier, like it remembered how to breathe again. That's when I asked for a meeting with senior leadership. We gathered in a small conference room, a polished oak table at the center, and a projector humming softly behind me. I connected my laptop and let the first slide load. A graph mapping defect rates, warranty expenses, and throughput efficiency over the past 3 months. The lines weren't subtle. Red peaks where they shouldn't be, valleys where there should have been stability. "This," I began, "is the cost of optimizing for the wrong variable." Richard Kane leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Go on." "Cost-cutting was framed as progress," I said. But there was no system in place to track quality impact. Decisions were made blind. Data was siloed. The people who understood the systems weren't consulted. They were removed. I clicked again. A new screen appeared. The dashboard for MARCS. Live metrics, machine-specific diagnostics, predictive alerts, and transparent reports. All in real time. "This is what I'm proposing," I continued. "A full integration of all equipment, old and new. A platform that gives you visibility before things go wrong. One that shows you not just what failed, but why, and what it will cost if ignored." "How long would implementation take?" someone asked. 3 months for full rollout. But the core is already built. And who would maintain it? I looked them in the eye. I would, under a long-term consulting agreement, 2 days a week on site, licensing through my new company. Your company? Kane asked. Louu Systems Integration, I replied, specializing in operational clarity and institutional preservation. No one spoke for a moment, but I could feel the shift. They were no longer trying to replace what I knew. Now, they were negotiating to keep it. After the meeting, I stepped out into the corridor and found Leon waiting by the break room. How'd it go? He asked, eyes searching mine. We'll see, I said. Either they understand what I'm offering, or they don't. He grinned. After everything that's happened, they'd be fools not to. I paused, then added, I'm going to need a floor operations lead for Louu Systems Integration. Someone who knows the machines, knows the people. Interested? Leon blinked. Then he smiled. Not with excitement, but with relief. You serious? Dead serious. I'm done building stability for people who see it as optional. Time to build something that respects what it's built on. 1 week later, the board approved the Marks proposal. Not just for Port and Aerotech, but for all 5 of Meridian's manufacturing sites. 6 months after that, I stood in the new control room overlooking the Savannah plant. The floor below buzzed with quiet efficiency. Tolerances holding, alerts pinging predictively, operators confident again. Richard Kane stood beside me. So did Clara Nguyen, their newly appointed chief operating officer. Your system, Clara said, gesturing toward the display wall, has given us visibility we didn't even know we lacked. It didn't create anything new, I replied. It just showed what was already there. Kane added, You should also know, we terminated our agreement with Thermogrid. Turns out, Ava was receiving consulting incentives from them, a clear conflict of interest. So that was it. She hadn't just underestimated me. She'd sold out the entire operation for short-term gain. Clara continued, We've enacted a new policy. No major operational change without full quality impact analysis and institutional knowledge mapping. We're calling it the Louu Protocol. I said nothing for a moment. Just watched the lines move smoothly on the monitors, watched Leon training 2 younger techs on diagnostic flow. And I thought, this wasn't revenge. This was correction. Exactly 1 year after I was let go, I stood in the corner office of Louu Systems Integration, overlooking the Savannah River. The autumn leaves along the banks had turned copper and crimson, the same way they had the day I walked out of Porton, with a cardboard box and my dignity intact. The office now housed 12 full-time employees, engineers, analysts, and support staff. Leon had become my right hand, managing implementation across Meridian's plants and training new teams in how to not just operate, but truly understand the systems beneath their fingertips. My phone buzzed with a message, Bay 4 optimization complete. All systems green. Leon, I smiled. We'd onboarded 3 new clients that quarter, each one drawn not by speed, but by precision. By something rarer than cutting-edge tech, trust built on lived experience. On my desk sat the latest issue of Industrial Edge. The cover story? The Knowledge Gap, How Louu Systems Integration is Reshaping Modern Manufacturing. Beside it lay an invitation to speak at next year's National Automation Summit, on a panel Ava Reynolds once headlined. I hadn't decided if I'd accept. My eyes drifted to a photo frame. My son at graduation last spring, beaming in his cap and gown. You didn't just survive, he told me that night over dinner. You made something better than what they threw away. Just then, my assistant poked her head in. Your 10 a.m. is here, the Velston Group. They're interested in reclaiming their legacy operations. CEO's asking for you by name. I straightened my collar and nodded. I was no longer the guy behind the scenes keeping things from falling apart. Now, I was the one people called when everything mattered. The parking lot looked smaller than I remembered. I stepped out of the rental and stared at the familiar steel structure of Port and Aerotech, now humming with activity, under a new banner and new leadership. But to me, it was still the place where everything began, where I'd left part of myself behind. Inside, the lobby had been renovated, sleeker panels, touch-screen directories. But the scent of oil and metal lingered in the air, unchanged. A young receptionist greeted me with a respectful nod. "Mr. Louu, the implementation team is ready for your walkthrough. Would you like a coffee?" I declined with a smile. As we walked through the main corridor, I passed a new shift of technicians, fresh faces in pressed uniforms. One of them, barely 30, glanced at my name tag, then did a double take. "Wait, are you the Louu behind Marks?" I nodded. He looked like he'd just seen the blueprint come to life. "Your system's incredible. We've never seen this level of predictive detail before. I've been trying to understand the logic behind Line 4's calibration models. It's elegant." That word made me stop. Elegant. No one had ever said that about my work before. Functional, efficient, reliable, but never elegant. I gave him a few notes. He jotted them down like gospel. In the control room, the plant manager, a woman named Elise, stood waiting. She was younger than Ava, but her eyes held something Ava's never did: humility. "We're grateful for your team's support, Marcus," she said, "and honored to have you here in person." As I looked out over the production floor from the mezzanine, I saw something I hadn't expected. Respect, not just for the systems, but for the man who built their foundation, not as an employee, as a partner.